would like to welcome you to our latest webinar on supporting teaching during COVID. This webinar gives you the opportunity to reflect on the key questions being faced regarding supporting teaching and provides you with some tips and solutions. We like our webinars to have some participation, so please ensure initially that you're muted, as that can prevent feedback, and use your hands raised and the chat facility to ask questions. We'll try to respond as quickly as possible during the webinar. Viewing our webinar today, we have some existing customers, but also some new attendees who may not be aware of Dementia Education, our IP solution, and the positive impact we're having on transforming teaching in schools and colleges across the world. Presenting today's webinar, myself, Andy Goodeve, and Becky Howitt. Me personally, I've had over 30 years experience in education. I've worked across a range of socially diverse schools in some of the most deprived regions in the country at senior leadership and headship level. I've recently been working to develop and improve schools, colleges and other educational institutions around the world. I've also contributed to research including the DFE Challenge to Workload, and I've spoken at a wide range of events and conferences across Europe. My belief is that our children and young people only get one opportunity at education, and therefore we have to ensure that our schools and colleges provide a positive environment for learning that motivates and engages our children to develop the skills and attitude needed to succeed in life. And my colleague Becky.
That's me. Just a little bit about me. I think Angela, you probably already know all about me. I've got over 20 years of experience in education, from primary school teacher. I worked on the SLT there. And then I went on to work for Notts Local Education Authority, training teachers, teaching teachers in inset days, in twilights, offering consultancy on site and on courses, etc. And then I became an international education consultant, again, training in all sorts of schools and colleges all around the world, which was really good fun. So now I'm a senior account manager at Dementia Education, training and supporting colleges and schools on the IP system. So that's a little bit about me.
All right, thank you very much, Becky. The COVID-19 pandemic is causing schools and colleges to have to operate in highly challenging and rapidly changing circumstances. They are required to juggle and rapidly implement a wide range of ever-changing control measures to ensure that staff, pupils and visitors are safe, as well as providing the educational provision both on site and remotely. That means the needs of our children and young people. Schools and colleges are faced with a number of challenging questions. These include: how are we ensuring our children and young people are receiving quality education provision? Do teachers know if they're delivering quality teaching? Are we developing necessary skills of our teachers? How are teachers coping and what support is actually needed? Their actual mental well-being. How do leaders know what's going on? Will finding out through monitoring increase the pressure on staff? Big questions are: how do leaders ensure there's a balance between knowing and not assuming what is going on, providing the help and support, but in a way not putting increased pressure on staff? A balancing act that comes down to the culture of the organisation, a culture of trust, transparency and support. It is clear some degree of monitoring must take place to know what's going on in the classroom, but it is the type and the amount of fact-finding and monitoring. This needs careful planning to achieve the desired outcome of knowing what is happening. In these times, successful schools and colleges are evaluating their current practices. Education is now different and therefore practices need to be prepared to change and evolve. It is clear that discretionary lesson observations, learning walks and drop-ins may at this time be difficult to administer and may in fact not serve a useful purpose, as they may not be a true reflection of the quality of teaching, the typicality of what is going on. There is nothing in the government's guidance that explicitly prohibits lesson observations or senior leaders visiting classrooms this term or in the future. However, these observations do pose increased risks and appropriate additional protective measures do need to be put in place. Big question is, what impact will these observations truly have on the judgment of teaching and learning? Ensuring the right culture is in place will be key to answering the previous questions. What monitoring are we going to use? What will the impact of the monitoring? Will the monitoring gain the effective outcome? Monitoring does not need to be a tick box exercise where leaders turn around and say, I have done this monitoring. The big question is, will the impact of the monitoring, has it improved teaching and learning? Leaders need to promote a culture to teachers to believe in their own ability, and they do and are able to deliver high quality lessons. Teachers need to have an understanding of what quality teaching looks like, an awareness that teaching is not a performance with fancy PowerPoint presentations and endless bespoke, colourful, laminated resources. High quality teaching and learning is brought about dialogue and discussion, knowing the position of the children and young people and what they need next in their learning journey, and not about producing loads and loads of paper. With this in mind, many schools and colleges are choosing to pursue a route that develops the staff through self-review and self-reflection. Staff develop a growth mindset where they crave feedback and have a willingness to improve. The positives are shared with others, and the areas of development are used to focus on their own professional development. There is an expectation that everyone has something that can be shared with others, and everyone has something that they can improve. Staff are signposted to each other to engage in professional discussions. What is the impact of changing this culture? Well, the main thing is the staff feel empowered, part of a team, part of the decision making, and the journey of them all being in it together. They're confident to try new ideas, embracing failure as a way of learning, and under the impression that no one is actually perfect and doesn't make mistakes. They're willing to engage, reflect and analyse their teaching and well-being, where the outcomes are used for professional development. They're embracing feedback, as this is known as one of the most things to impact on learning, all leading to happier, skilled staff delivering quality lessons and better outcomes for children and young people. It is now time for me to hand over to my colleague, Becky, who will talk through some of the strategies and how school IP, college IP, is able to assist schools and colleges to support teachers and improve teaching during COVID-19.
Thanks, Andy. So that was the theory behind a shift of culture, maybe a change of practice. Maybe that's requested now more than ever with the onset of COVID-19. And, you know, we all know that there were many challenges that schools and colleges have had to face in terms of chopping and changing, in terms of children and young people still being taught inside of schools, but also children and young people being taught outside. So I'm going to throw a few ideas around of how IP can help with some of those changes. These are some suggestions. There's not an exhaustive list. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of each of these areas. And then if you're interested in all of them or some of them, then what I suggest is that we book in some time at another time that we can go over the training of these in a little bit more depth and see how they fit in with your organisation. So we're going to look at self-reflective forms, self-reflective rather than observations. Obviously, in this time when we can't meet each other, when we want to minimise our crossing over our bubbles, it's more important now than ever. We want to find out about how our staff are doing. You know, what's their well-being like during COVID-19? We want to know if we can support them in any other way by collaborating together, by supporting each other, sharing is caring and all of that. And talking about sharing and caring, sharing and collaborating on documents, how can we use IP to support that? And finally, the idea of annotating videos. More and more in the last few months have teachers and lecturers and other support staff used tools like Zoom, tools like Teams to deliver content to their young people and students. But what have they been doing with those videos? So we can discuss those ideas. Okay, so first we're going to have a look at self-reflective forms. This is what forms could look like. You might already recognise these from the forms that you've got in IP if you've started to use those already. So we've got ideas of a wellbeing form here. A user, a teacher perhaps, could answer these questions really simply in whether they agree, disagree, or whether they're not sure. And they've always got the opportunity to enter some text there in addition to that. This is more like a traditional learning walk, again, where instead of agreeing and disagreeing, they're considering whether they are emerging, developing, or succeeding. So basically, a self-reflective bit of a self-reflective form just means it's a setting whereby the staff member can complete a form to review their own practice rather than the practice that's being observed by somebody else completing a form. So that's a big difference here. Obviously, in today's situation that we find ourselves in, we have to be flexible and we have to think we need some Q&A going on, but actually it can't be observed by another very easily at this time. So by setting up a self-reflective form, it's really simple and easy to administer. It means that it's online, obviously very important during COVID-19. It negates the necessity to cross over your social bubbles, unlike more traditional types of monitoring and support. And obviously it reduces the need for face-to-face observations whilst maintaining standards. It can be of any relevant areas of teaching and learning. It can be posed in any question format. But because the staff are completing it on their own practice, it often promotes the feeling of empowerment and confidence, and it encourages those staff to take charge of their own reflections. So that works really well in organisations where the outcomes are used for professional development and support. And what that means for the SLT of those organisations is that they can access the reporting mechanisms that enable them to analyse, and sometimes at a very granular level, the results from these questionnaires, these surveys, these forms. They can analyse questions across several forms or the same form over a long period of time, and basically it's in order to facilitate support. And it's so important now while staff perhaps are feeling a little isolated and a little disparate. So examples of self-reflective forms might be a wellbeing form. You will need to find out how your staff are doing. It's a book scrutiny form. So are they doing marking at the moment of work? It doesn't have to be a book. It can be an online book. It might be a tick list for, am I complying to a COVID safe environment? It might be coaching and mentoring questions, or a particular self-reflection for support staff with a different style of questioning on there. Or it might be for the head of department, where they're reviewing how their heads of department and how their department is running. So it can be basically on anything. And here are some examples of them. I'm going to extract these resources and upload them with this webinar. Hopefully by the end of tomorrow, you'll be able to see the recording and those resources. So how do you create them? Big question. The easiest way is to send your existing form to us and we can create it for you. So you might already have it existing on paper, on a Word document. We'll take a look at the questions. We'll ask you about what you want to get out of that, and it might need a little bit of discussion in between, but we'll create the form for you. If you wanted to create it yourself, a quick whiz around IP shows you that you'd have to be logged in as the right user. So that would be anybody with the rights to see settings, usually an administrator. I would go to settings, I would go to performance management, observations, observation forms, and I can see all of the observation forms that I've got created for this school already. If I wanted to create a new one, I would click on the plus, add that in, give it a title, head heads of department self-review checklist, and then begin to fill in the other fields. So I would begin to add questions in, detailing what kind of question style I would like. Okay. Now I could go through all of that and go through each question style, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show you where the help is for that. So you would go to help. You would go to the training guide, course 3 administrator training. And in the contents there is creating a new observation form. But like I say, one of the easiest things to do is send us in what you've got and we'll discuss and we'll create that for you. Okay, so I've mentioned wellbeing forms already, and I wanted to give that a further mention now, especially during COVID-19, because it's so important to find out how your staff are really feeling. Bearing in mind that forms can be anonymous as well. So for this type of form, that might be the best case scenario. So you really get some indication of the general feeling and consensus amongst your staff. So as we know, it's fundamental to find out those answers to those questions about the overall health of staff now more than ever. Why would you do that? Well, it would help you understand the key issues. I'm sure certain things would float to the top, and just get under the skin of how your staff are experiencing coping during COVID-19. The biggest reason why you might do this on IP is because of the tools of analysis. It's so easy to gather together multiple data sets and analyse those to a granular level, to print off reports, to share reports, and then offer that help that might be needed. So some organisations periodically will send out the same form, so then they can gain an insight to see if there's been a change in opinion, or to see if there's been an impact of measures that have been taken since the last form was completed. So, like I said, we do have reporting mechanisms there with filters to a fairly sophisticated degree. And anybody who's used those already will know that they can save those reports and come back to them later too. And just with a hit of a button, get the fresh data in the reports that they needed. But examples of the kind of questions that you might put on wellbeing might be to do with workload. It might be to do with steps to take if one is feeling overwhelmed. It might be about work-life balance. So those kind of questions that we do see bandied about quite a lot, but do you really know the answers to them within your organisation? This could give you the opportunity. Okay. And this is again what it could look like. You could have, it could just be really simple with whether your staff member agrees, disagrees, not sure, and give them the opportunity to put a comment there. Or it could be far more in depth. So the kind of reporting and the kind of data analysis for the leadership team and any other who's been given permission to see that is really quite in depth. So we have preset reports, or a user can create bespoke reports utilising the sophisticated filtering system. They can analyse a single form, or they can analyse data across multiple forms if it's got the same questions on. It can be analysed per question grading, groupings, specific question breakdown, question comments, and or a combination of all of those things. And this is what the screen looks like. Reports can be printed out very easily and shared with those people who don't have access to your IP system or for any other use within your organisation. I'm going to move on to the idea of adding collaborators as something that's quite important during this time. What does a collaborator mean? Well, a collaborator is another person who can have access to your appraisal for the purposes of support. It gives clarity across the board to other people other than just your line manager. So that might be a wellbeing buddy in your organisation. It could be a pastoral lead. It could be the COVID project lead. Thinking of those kind of leads that might be relevant right now. Now, by adding a collaborator into an individual's performance management, it kind of attaches importance to that. It attaches importance to that pastoral lead, let's say, for example. It could support colleagues during the COVID-19, the mass rollout of testing that so many secondaries and colleges are having to deal with right now. The collaborator can be set up to view and edit just selected sections of a staff member's performance management, not all of it. And indeed, that's not necessary for another to see all of that. So how do you do that? Very quickly, I'm going to give you a brief overview. If I'm in my IP system, I would go to Home. I'll go to My Staff and see the list of my staff. So I'm going to set up a collaborator for Steve Farm. So here's Steve Farm's work area. I would click on Collaborators and then click on What Next? Add a collaborator. I could select the collaborator from their subject area if I wanted to, or their user group, but ordinarily I would just go to the list of staff and select the collaborator, giving them the rights that I wish. In this case, viewing of objectives, view and manage of areas for development, view and manage CPD activities and courses. And I would save that. So now I can see that Jessica Alcott, who's a teacher, is now a collaborator of Steve Farm, and they can begin to communicate using IP. So if I was Jessica, what would that look like for me? So I'm now going to logged in as Jessica. Here's OK, and I'm going to go to Steve, and I can see here that I can only see now what I've been given permission to see. So I can begin to support Steve in these areas here. OK. I can also, so one example of that was the areas for development, and I can see all of the areas for development that Steve has been contributing to so far. OK, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to move on to sharing and collaborating of documents this time. So why might you want to do this to support COVID-19? Basically, it might be that you want to share clear guidance and policies on COVID-19 response information, mass testing, wellbeing advice, etc. And sharing that is more important than ever. Now, you might say to me, well, Becky, why don't we just share that on our organisation Drive, or why don't we just share it on Google Documents? The idea is keeping all of the information regarding appraisals, performance management and support, keeping that all together in one place makes it easy to refer to at a later date. So if I was the wellbeing collaborator, I would want that in my IP site. So how do you do that practically? OK, so I would go to Home, and I would go to my own work area this time. And I'm going to upload that document first as a piece of evidence into my folder by going to What Next, Add Evidence. I'm going to upload a file, saving my file, and the file I'm uploading is Pupil Wellbeing and Support Guidance for COVID. And the next thing I want to do is share that. Okay, so I'm going to share it with individuals. I could, however, share it with whole departments or indeed the whole school. I usually like sharing it with individuals, then I know that I can select those people and add that in. So how does a member of staff share that, access that shared document? So I'm going to log in as Ben Booth. He was one of the members of staff who I've shared that with, and Ben would basically go to his sharing feed, and he can see now that document there that Jessica's just shared with him. And that's there forever for him to refer to. Okay, finally, I want to throw the idea in there of the annotation tools that are available in IP. So now more than ever, teachers are using Teams and Zoom, and they're using the record functions of those two pieces of software to record the video. And that can be for several different purposes. One, to share with the students so they can refer back to it. Two, you might have students who are absent from the original. But three, it might be for some form of self-reflection in their teaching. It might be some form of sharing that reflection with others. And that could be with sharing it with their coach and mentor, or it could be sharing it with their line manager. And by inserting the video into the tools of IP, we can then begin to annotate that once we're viewing it. Okay, so IP has the potential to store and annotate those recordings. We can store those for reflection, like we've just mentioned, or for flipped learning for teachers. And we can store it for coaching and mentoring. So I'm going to briefly talk you through how to do this, but this really does deserve some extra training so we can get it right for your organisation. So basically you would record it in Teams and Zoom, or you could record a live lesson in other circumstances in the classroom using your IP app. The IP app is downloadable via Apple or Android, and there's one called School IP, there's one called College IP and one called University IP. So you would download the one that's appropriate for your organisation, record the video, and then you would simply upload it to your IP site, ready for you to review and annotate it. Once you've done that, you can then share it with others to view and annotate. And it's just a way that right now it's just so easy to do that, and so easy to share it for any form of quality control measures that you still want to continue with as an organisation. So what I would suggest do is booking in a free online training session, and I'll give you those details in a moment. So I just want to finish off just by summarising some of these areas that we've been on. We've looked at self-reflective forms, we've looked at forms just for wellbeing, we've looked at adding collaborators, and we've looked at sharing documents, and we've looked at video annotation tools. So I don't know whether you want to unmute your mics now and let me know your thoughts on any of those areas. If you think that now perhaps you could use some of those, or it might take a little bit of thought and some discussion with colleagues, let me know your thoughts. So Angela, have you got any thoughts on any of those?
Yeah, hi, thank you for that, Rebecca. I certainly the forms I definitely want to explore. I already had that on my sort of list of something I wanted to go into more, but I really like the idea of developing that into self-reflective forms. Yeah. And also the survey. I hadn't clocked about using IP for survey. I think we could use that in future, possibly for more, you know, those more regular sort of small pulse type surveys.
Sure.
Just a few questions and just checking in with people. I think that could be a great tool. So I want to think about that. And the question about the video, I'm just thinking if you're already, because you know there's an awful lot of collaboration opportunity within Teams itself, and that's our main mechanism for both our staff and students to be collaborating on documents and so on. It all happens within Teams, and similarly, if they're recording something, is there an, I don't know if there's an annotation tool within Teams, or are you suggesting that the best way to do the annotation is in any case is to come out of Teams and to go into IP with it?
Yeah. As far as I'm aware, there isn't an annotation tool in
Right.
Teams. It basically allows you to record your video, it hosts it, and then that's that basically.
That's it. Right.
And
Okay.
what your staff members have probably been doing already is sharing the link then with their students, so they can then go back and watch that video. So then the next step on from that would be to insert the video into IP. And if you think about it, it's a piece of evidence. It's a piece of evidence for that teacher that they've taught that lesson, they've taught it in a certain way, they probably included and tried to include interaction from their students, etc., etc. And so it's kind of used in a different way other than just as a replay tool. It's there for the teacher to reflect on their teaching of that lesson, so they can add some annotations. Also, as well, to share it with other teachers. Look, this is how I'm doing it. How are you doing it? And also, then, if necessary, to share it with a coach, a mentor, and/or line manager for a little bit of support. Traditional support in their teaching and learning. So it's moving on really from just being able to show a straight recording.
Yeah, no, I understand. That's good.
And it might be that there's just one focus of that lesson that they wanted to share with their coach and mentor. So using the annotation tool could literally just simply be, this is the bit that I want you to have a look at. What did you think of?
So it could be edited, in other words, you're saying just a small part of the lesson. They could cut the rest out and just say focus on that particular bit and say yeah.
Absolutely. And so then whoever they've shared it with, whoever they want to glean some insight from, they would just jump straight to that bit, and they could put their comments on it. So then it's working more now as a development tool. Yeah.
No, that's really good. Thank you. These are all good ideas.
Brilliant. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions at all? Okay, I'll move on. Thanks for that, and thanks for those questions. So just remember, you can watch this video again. We're going to upload it to the webinars page on our website. If you want to have a look at any of those areas in more depth, then please book on a training session. I know we're used to doing that. I'll put the link on there as well. There are some more webinars coming up. Andrew, I know that you've booked in already. We're updating the list as well. So have a look at the other ones that will be refreshed on there by the end of tomorrow. The next one is probation periods. The one after that is SEF and the SDP cycle. So unless we've got any more questions, I'll leave that screen on for a moment. Remember that you'll find it on our Deventio education website, where you can go and review the video again. So does anybody else have any more questions before we finish? Okay, well, thank you so much for listening. Thanks for dialing in this evening. Enjoy your evening, have a cup of coffee, put your feet up, have a nice dinner, and I'm sure we'll be speaking again soon.